to Psychology. I'm Dr. Jennifer Cosgrove. And with this lesson, what we're going to do is look at how psychologists go about studying, how they go about investigating, how they conduct research in human behavior and mental processes. So if you take a look at our handy-dandy slides here, let's start with the goals of psychology. Okay? The goals of psychology include describe, understand, or other ways we can say explain, predict, control, in other words, say influence, behavior, mental processes. And as I go through these, I want to kind of explain them to you, and I want you to keep in mind that it's not just goals that we as psychologists use. I would say all human beings use these. We all are interested in how the world works. We're all little scientists trying to figure out why people do things, including ourselves. And so these apply to all of us. So for example, describe. First off, with a lot of research in psychology, we just simply want to go through the statistics, the information, the description, the symptoms. What we're trying to describe what we see, what is the phenomenon that we're looking at right now, okay? So for example, if I was going to take a mental illness, say bipolar depression, okay, one simple thing would be to describe what is meant by that, what is the definition of that, what are the symptoms of that, okay? But in regular life, if say you have a new roommate, more than likely your parents or friends are going to contact you and say, okay, well, tell me all about your roommate. What are you going to do? You're going to be describing your roommate. So we all do this, right? Next step, understand, or in other words, explain. How can we figure out why this occurs, okay? Why does this happen? So whether that's describing, again, a disorder like bipolar depression, how do we understand it? Where does it come from? Okay, is it something that is genetic? Is it something that's caused by environmental trauma or something like that? We're trying to explain or understand this phenomena. And we do the same thing. If you have a new roommate, aren't you going to try to understand that roommate? Try to explain that roommate. Why do they leave their dirty clothes all over the bathroom all the time? Why can't they not take care of their dishes? Why do they do what they do, right? So we all do that. Next up we have here predict. Okay, so if we can describe, if we can understand a behavior or mental process, maybe we can also predict when it will occur. Okay, can we predict who is more likely to have bipolar depression, or when is it more likely to happen in a lifespan? Those kinds of things. And the same thing is can you predict? Can you predict if your roommate will go ballistic if you borrow something without asking first, right? That kind of thing is something we all do. And finally, we have control or influence. Do psychologists want to control behavior? That sounds really awful, doesn't it? Maybe we'd rather say influence behavior. But we do use control. We use control as methods in our actual research methods, like when we conduct an experiment. But we also indeed want to influence behavior. If you have someone coming to you and you're a therapist and they have bipolar depression, okay, do they want you to influence them? You bet they do, right? They're coming to you because they're hoping that you can help them with this disorder and these symptoms that they're experiencing. And so the same thing, do we control and influence others in our lives as just regular human beings? Of course we do, whether we mean to or not. We influence our roommates, we influence our parents influenced us. We do these all the time. So these goals of psychology are typical of all psychologists, but I would say they're very typical of all of us as human beings. Okay? So we're going to be talking about a variety of research methods, but I think sometimes when you hear research, you think of somebody in a laboratory with a white lab coat, and there's something extra special about people who conduct research. And I want to show you a video of a 9-year-old who conducted research. She had some help. Her mom was also helping her. There were several people that were listed on the list of authors for this, but she was published in the American Journal of the American Medical Association. Let me say this again. Okay, let me just do this one over. Okay, so lots of times when people hear research, they think of someone who's in a laboratory wearing a white lab coat, and they think, oh, that's something just certain people can do, people who have doctor on their name and they're highly educated. But all of us, in a way, do research, and it's something that anyone can do. And to give you an example of that, I have here a 9-year-old who conducted research that was published in a very prestigious journal, the Journal of the American Medical Association, JAMA. And it's a very interesting study that she did. She did have some help. She wasn't the only author, but I think you'll enjoy watching this video where she demonstrates what her research was all about and how she conducted it. Okay, so now that you've seen that, just wanted to show you how fun that was actually. The people that are in that video you might be curious to know more about. They had the Amazing Randi in there. Amazing Randi is a magician who does a lot of debunking of all kinds of paranormal claims that people have of what they can do in terms of bending spoons and reading minds and all of that kind of thing. And so if you're interested in the Amazing Randi, he has his own website and YouTube channel if you want to take a look at that. Okay, so looking at this list, please don't try to write all this down at once. Okay, I'm just showing you where we're going today. We're going to talk about the case study, also called a case history in some places. Observational studies, there's a variety of those. Psychological testing, surveys, and then correlational research that comes from the information and the data that we gather from doing surveys. Finally, there's the experiment. That won't be covered in this section, but I just want to have it in the list of the research methods that psychologists use. Okay, the case study. Case study is the first one that we're going to look at, sometimes called a case history. And it's where we study one single individual in great detail. So it's like a scientific biography. An example I have here is the movie A Beautiful Mind, which was about John Nash. John Nash was a Nobel Prize-winning mathematician, and what really set him apart from being a Nobel Prize winner, of course, is that he was a person who suffered from schizophrenia. So it's a fascinating individual to study, and you can go into that in great detail. So that was an example, in a way, when you see that in a movie. And we all find these fascinating. They're stories, they're biographies. But we have to be very careful when we look at these, because what we learn from one person, we can't necessarily assume could be applied to anyone else with that disorder. Certainly, we wouldn't assume that everybody with schizophrenia could also win Nobel Prizes. But even just other things, we've got to be very careful with that. Ideally, in science, we want to be able to generalize. We can't study absolutely everybody on the planet, so we want to be able to look at a new reading program for first graders, and if it works, assume that we can apply it to other first graders who are similar, right? They're American English-speaking first graders, right? So we want to be able to generalize. We can't do that with case studies. So why do we do them? Because they're fascinating, because they can lead us towards other kinds of research. They can help us narrow down our questions, to get focused, to think of some other aspects of the situation where we can look at what could be causes, what could be influences, what could we learn that could predict, all those things having to do with those goals of psychology that we have. Now, I also mentioned that it could be a group. Technically, you could have a case study that's a group, and usually that would be a group because it's very unusual. For example, the miners in Chile who were underground for weeks and weeks and weeks, okay, they have been studied extensively. Very unique situation. Why would we want to study them? Well, because they were people that were in a very unusual, very stressful situation. And they came out of it pretty well. They came out of it emotionally pretty well. And they're being continued to look at for those reasons, to see how they're handling it. But they talked about methods they used when they were underground to maintain their sanity. And one of them was that they had a special corner where you could go and just be by yourself for a while. So those kinds of things are studied extensively, and they're fascinating. You just got to be careful, especially when you see like a dramatization in a movie. For example, John Nash, he had auditory hallucinations. He heard voices. That is what's more typical for people with schizophrenia. But if you watch the movie, spoiler alert, he has visual hallucinations in that one. Okay. Next up, observational studies. Now, technically, all research is based on observation. We have to observe people, observe data, we're doing that. But these are called observational studies because it's fundamentally what we're doing. We're observing people, animals, and taking down data as we're very carefully observing them. We're observing them in a scientific, systematic fashion. So that's quite different from just sitting in a restaurant outside watching people go by, okay? That's fun, but that's not observational studies. We have 3 different types here I've got listed: naturalistic, laboratory, and participant observation. And let me go through those with you. Okay. If you look at the picture here, you've got Jane Goodall, and I know it might be hard to see, but those are chimps that are across from her. And she's a famous researcher who studied chimp behavior for decades and decades. And that's an example of naturalistic observation. She went to the wilds of Africa to study chimps in their natural habitat. Okay, so when you as a comparative psychologist or as a developmental psychologist going to study children, if you're a social psychologist studying people in groups, when you go to where people naturally hang out, it's their natural work environment, play environment, whatever it is, that's called naturalistic observation. Now, another type of observation is laboratory observation. And no, it doesn't mean that you're bringing chimps and kids to a laboratory with bubbling beakers of, chemicals. What it means is that they are coming to you, okay? So if I'm interested in the play behavior of preschool children, I could go to their preschool where they go 5 days a week. That would be naturalistic observation. Or I might have a really cool set up in my university where there's a particular lab, and it's where I have cameras in the corners of the room to record the play behavior as the children are in the playroom. I've got a wall that looks like a mirror on one side, but actually it's a window, and I have my grad students on the other side taking down data as they're watching, okay? So I have a really nice room. It's decorated really cute. It's got all kinds of fun toys in it. So very similar to their preschool in that it's a fun place to be, but I also have more control because I have all these things set up for it, which makes it easier for me to take down data and review it and have more observers. Okay, so that's laboratory observation. Participant observation I think is really neat. Participant observation is when you're basically a spy. You're going undercover. You're joining groups and pretending to be like them in order to study them. So, for example, there have been studies of doomsday cult groups. Every now and then you hear about a group that's deciding that the end of the world is nigh, whether it's because we're turning to the year 2000. Oh, wait, no, it's 2001. No, it's 2012. I don't know when the next one is, but, and you have people that, psychologists who, especially like, say, social psychologists who are fascinated with the group dynamics going on, and they join. They pretend to be one of the true believers. And when they can, they sneak off to take down, their observations and write them down. But they're pretending to be one of the people as part of that. So that's participant observation. Now, I have here a couple of things to be careful of, and certainly there are other things, but I'm just sort of tapping into the main things to kind of give you a taste for each of these approaches. And one of the things that we have to be careful of is that when people or even animals know they're being observed, very often they act differently, okay? If you're ever going to be, say, a teacher and you're doing your teacher training and you're doing classroom observations, the teachers will tell you, and you'll notice when you walk in the room with strangers in the room, the kids act differently, right? They're kind of poking each other, looking over at you a lot. They might be acting up. They might be trying to be extra good. All kinds of ways that they act a little differently because they know someone different's in the room watching them, okay? So when you can, it's great if you can conceal the observer. So if you're studying animals, if you can be in a duck blind or somehow you're not there. I love those cameras that they have in the wild, those deer cams and things like that, where we kind of see what animals are doing when we're not around. So when you can do that, if you can't, like you saw in the picture here, Jane Goodall would just hang out with the chimps for a long time until she believed that they were now used to her being there and were acting naturally. Then she would start taking down her data. Okay, then she'd start writing her observations. Okay, so we have that concern. Another concern we have is beware of observer bias. We as human beings have a tendency to see what we want to see. We just do that, whether we mean to or not. And so it's very important that before you go in to observe, that you are systematic about what it is you're going to observe. So make like a checklist. Be real specific about what are the behaviors you're going to be looking at. Okay? And also be careful about considering the whole picture. Okay? So like if I'm doing an observation of a particular child who the parents and teachers believe has, say, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And I'm thinking one of the best things to do is observe the child in his or her classroom. Okay. My checklist shouldn't just be all kinds of ADHD kinds of behaviors. It should be a variety of behaviors, right? Okay. So I'm not just zeroing in on just those. I've got the whole picture. Okay. So it's not just talking out of turn. It's also talking after first being called on by raising your hand, right? It's not just fidgeting, it's also not fidgeting, okay? It's a variety of things to have the whole picture. Don't just be narrow-minded about what I'm looking for. It's also very helpful with observer bias to have more than one observer. That's why those laboratory observations are kind of neat, because if you can have recordings, then other people can go back and look at the recordings, right? If you've got the cameras in the room. If you've got several grad students behind the mirror, okay, you've got more than one person observing what's happening, so you can kind of cross-check what you're seeing with each other. Okay? So be careful of that observer bias, and that's something that we as scientists, as psychologists, need to be aware of all the time with whatever study we're doing. Is check our biases. Be aware of that. Psychological testing. So we use the term testing, we might use the term assessment, okay? And we use testing in a variety of ways, okay, as I have at the very bottom here. They may be used to determine who's in a study or used to evaluate outcomes, okay? So I'm conducting research on a new treatment for depression, okay? I might use testing as a way to determine who should be in my study. Okay, so I might have a very simple test like the Beck Depression Inventory, which I'm going to talk about a little bit. And I decide that if I'm going to do a study about treating people with depression, I have to define my terms, and I have to say exactly what do I mean by depressed. Okay, so I might say that I will only have people who score a certain number on this test, which shows they have at least moderate level of depression, in order to be in my study, because I want my study to be with people who have depression. So I might use testing that way, where it's just helping me decide who's in or out of my study. Another thing might be I might be using it to determine outcomes, to help me with that. So if I am indeed doing a study where I'm looking at a new treatment for depression, I'm probably going to have one group has the new treatment, one group has an old treatment, one group is on a waiting list, okay? And I'll probably use that same kind of test like the Beck Depression Inventory to give them at the beginning of the program to see where they are. And then after going through the treatment or being on the waiting list for an equal amount of time, have them take the test again so I can see did they improve and how much did they improve, and be able to compare those three different groups. Okay, so that's how testing is often used in research. Okay, so as I have at the beginning here, the tests are procedures to measure and evaluate personality traits, aptitudes, values, interests, abilities, emotions. We've all taken tests, not just academic tests, but you've also taken tests that you might have taken tests that look at your interests and values for careers, right? You might have taken tests about personality. Okay? There's a variety of tests that we've all taken. Now we can talk about tests and two major categories when it comes to personality kinds of measurements. We talk about objective tests and projective tests. And those are terms that you should remember. Objective tests are when a person is being asked questions that they can easily answer. These are asking questions about things about themselves that they're aware of. Okay. These tests are often called inventories, and pretty much you get good results if people are honest. And you probably have seen that very often. You've taken a test that's, in a magazine or on a website where, you get your best results if you're really honest. And that's the case with these objective tests. Projective tests are a little different. Projective tests are usually designed to get at material that people aren't necessarily consciously aware of. And so the idea behind projection is that you're given some kind of ambiguous stimulus and asked to do something with it. And because there's no right, wrong, true, false, scale of 1 to 5 kind of thing about that, it's basically coming out of you how you're responding to it. You're projecting your own motivations, your own issues, whatever you want to call it, onto this ambiguous stimulus, and then it's interpreted by the person giving the test. So let's look at some examples of these. The Beck Depression Inventory, it's now in a second version. That's why you have that Roman numeral 2 there. It's a 21 groups of items, and you're asked to give the one answer that best describes how you've been feeling for the past 2 weeks, including today, for each of those 21 groups of items. So I have an example of one of these, sadness. Okay? So in the past 2 weeks, how have you been feeling when it comes to sadness? And you have these choices of, I do not feel sad. I feel sad much of the time. I'm sad all of the time. I'm so sad or unhappy that I can't stand it. Okay? This is a very simple, straightforward test. This is an objective test. Notice that even in the title it's called an inventory, so you can see that. But see how it's just, you're aware of this. It's totally up to you how honest you're going to be about how you're feeling. And this test has very good reliability and validity, which I'll explain in a little bit. And the 0, 1, 2, 3, you just simply add up the numbers as for those 21 items, and there's this scale of minimal depression, moderate, severe kind of thing. Okay. Now, how about this one? What do you make of this? Want to guess what this test is? What this card is from? This is from the Rorschach ink blot test. You probably have heard about that, and this is one of the cards. This isn't the first one you get. There's 10 of these cards, and you start off with ones that are more in shades of gray, black and white, a little bit of red, and then you get into some of these more colorful ones. And so the way it works is I hand you one of these cards at a time, and you take it in your hand, and I ask you, what might this be? And that's it. What might this be? What do you see? See how there's no, choices of 4 different ways to respond. There's no true, false, yes, no. It's, what do you get? So it's completely out of you what you're going to see. And there are a number of common responses that people see in these cards, and then you might have ones that are more individual. I can't tell you a whole lot about this because our psychologists have our secrets when it comes to how we go about evaluating these. But we do look at things like common responses and unusual responses, use of color, how much of the blot you're using, if you're using a small part or the whole thing. There's a variety of things we look at, including the content. There's 10 of these cards, and I just want to caution you that no one is evaluated just on one single thing that they say. And when it comes to evaluating people, we never go just by one test. We always include interviewing the person, talking with the person. That's the most important thing of all. Okay? So if you're going to see a therapist, the most important thing is the therapist saying, why are you here? What do you want help with? What's going on with you? That's what the most important thing is the interview. And there are a number of psychologists that don't even use these projective tests. Beck Depression Inventory, use that a lot. It's very easy to give. It's basically one sheet of paper, both sides. We can quickly look at that, and it's very helpful because a lot of people do come to us who are anxious and depressed, and we need to spot that right away, especially in case someone's suicidal. This one that you're seeing here, you may never see this in a psychologist's office. There are a lot of psychologists that don't use it. But there are some that do use it, and I've been trained in it. If you're looking at this, wondering what you might see in this, I'll talk about one common one. Any of you see the face of a cow or a bull there? And you see, here's the head, the face looking straight on. Here's the nostrils. Okay. You might have included these as horns. Okay, that's a very common response, is to see that. Okay. Some people look at the green area and they see frogs or bunnies, variety there. Personally, I see scoops of raspberry sherbet on the bottom.